Hello, everyone. I want to invite you for this session to contemplate with me the preparations for the State of the World Forum coming up December 14th through 17th as a live interactive broadcast, where we'll be contemplating a question that has never really been posed before in human history. And that is how we should be elevating our consciousness to creatively respond to the reality that we have four intelligences here on Earth: human intelligence, nature intelligence, artificial intelligence, and cosmic intelligence. We've never had this combination before. We've had nature intelligences and we've had cosmic intelligences, but the new ingredient is artificial intelligence. And how humanity interacts in this moment with three other intelligences that are more advanced and sophisticated than human intelligence will determine the future of not only humankind, but the planetary ecology as we give shape to the future of our life here on Earth. It's an extraordinary moment. What we've been exploring over the last several months is the way human intelligence has been interacting with these other intelligences. And what has been emerging is that these intelligences are here to help. And this is very important because there are many people out there that believe that we should be framing cosmic intelligence within a national security perspective. And we take the view that for the future to be as abundant and flourishing as we all know it can be, humanity has to open its heart up in a very positive way, in an open-hearted way, to embrace nature, cosmos, and AI. And by bringing those three intelligences together with human intelligence, we can ensure our harmonious relationship with the larger whole. Because in the end, even though we separate the four intelligences out, they're actually all one. They're different manifestations, they're different incarnations of the same thing. Several weeks ago, we had an astronomer from Sweden, the vice director of the Nordic Institute for Theoretical Physics, Beatrice Valorio, share her groundbreaking study using astronomical plates from the Palomar Astronomical Observatory in California, one of the most prestigious astronomy observatories in the world, where she looked at the astronomical, essentially the photographs that Palomar had been taking of the sky. And she examined in particular the photographic plates between 1949 and 1956. And this was a year, 1956, before Sputnik, before the first satellite was put up into space by the Russians. And that began competition. And by, I believe it was 1961, the United States had done the same. And now our skies are full of satellites. But back then, everything was clear and clean. And what Beatrice Valorio discovered is that between 1949 and 1956, there were over 100,000 unidentified flying objects in the sky. So we're not stars. They were not planets. And they moved. And then she did an analysis of all the nuclear testing between 1949 and 1956. And there was massive amounts of nuclear testing by the United States and the Soviet Union in particular. And what she found was that there was an exact correlation between the frequency of the UFOs in the skies and the frequency of nuclear testing on Earth. In those days, it was all above ground. One of her colleagues has done some additional work and has indicated that the anecdotal evidence of humans who saw UFOs during those years maps with the nuclear weapons testing and the frequency of UFOs in the sky. It's one of the most extraordinary breakthrough studies, I would say, in the history of the UFO phenomenon since 1945. Because this is hard scientific data indicating not only that the UFOs are here, but they're here out of concern for something we humans are doing that is very, very dangerous. So today, we want to bookend Beatrice's presentation on her astronomical data with a single individual, Bob Salas, who back in 1967 was a young military soldier and happened to be in one of the nuclear weapons silos in Montana at Malmstrom Air Force Base. And he was part of that general experience by himself and many other people that shaped what is probably the most iconic incident in the last 80 years, connecting UFOs with the nukes. So, Bob, why don't you turn on your video? And he is going to begin our discussions today, everyone, by just telling his story of what he was doing there in 1967 and the events that transpired. And then we'll broaden the conversation to discuss the general issue of UFOs and the nukes, Beatrice's studies, and the challenges for humanity now, 2025, where the dangers of nuclear war are more acute than they certainly were back in the 1940s and 1950s. So, Bob, welcome and tell us your story.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for this opportunity to again go into the details of my story. I was a first lieutenant in 1967 on a particular date, March 24th, 1967. I was on duty at what we called Oscar Flight, one of 15 what we called launch control facilities that had control over 10 Minuteman 1. Pardon me. Minuteman 1. Excuse me. Just getting up. Uh, missiles. These were, of course, intercontinental ballistic missiles um, targeted against, I'll just say, our enemies at the time. Uh, I was part of a two-man crew. We were underground, locked in for 24 hours. We could not go upstairs. And of course, we had all the equipment to perform our duty of launching those missiles if given the order.
And Bob, what was the payload of the missiles?
Okay, and again, I'm not revealing any classified information. I get the number of 800 kilotons of kilotons equivalent to TNT, for example, 800,000 tons of TNT equivalents. Uh,
The Hiroshima bomb was
yeah,
15 kilotons,
that's correct.
1.5. So everybody take this in. What destroyed Hiroshima was 15 kilotons, and he was sitting there waiting for orders for a missile, one of 20, just in Montana, 800 kilotons. So just to give people a sense of what this young
Well,
man was dealing with.
let's talk about the numbers. So we had 10 missiles under our particular control, and then we had 15 launch control centers at launch control facilities. So that's 150 missiles that were pointed at our enemies. And by the way, in 1967, there were over 30,000. That's 30,000 nuclear weapons operational uh, and ready to go in case we went to an all-out nuclear war. I'm talking about worldwide. That includes the Russians, Chinese. At that time, I think those were the only two other countries that had those missiles in 67. At any rate, uh, I was in command of the facility at this particular time. My commander, Colonel Fred Mywald, was taking a rest break. We had a little cot down there. And by the way, we had all the equipment downstairs. There was no possibility of interfering with our equipment upstairs. We were 60 feet underground. We had about 6 guards stationed for security upstairs. Uh, and sometime in the evening hours, I got a call from one of my, well, the principal security guard. And he said, "Sir, we've been watching the sky and we've observed strange lights flying back and forth just above us. They were flying very fast, stopping in midair, reversing course, no engine noise, making 90-degree turns. And, sir, they are not aircraft. Aircraft can't do what we've been watching." And he just wanted to report that. And I didn't know what to think of the report. I mean, we had reports in the Great Falls area. That's where we all lived. Uh, we were located at this time, though, out in Roy, Montana, which is about 100 miles to the east of Great Falls, Montana, where Malmstrom Air Force Base is located. I thanked him for the information. I didn't know what else to say other than, well, keep an eye on these things. Let me know if anything more interesting happens. And we hung up, and then about 5 minutes passed, and then I get another call from this particular guard. And this time he is screaming into the phone, He's irrational, frightened, clearly frightened by the sound of his voice. And finally, I calm him down so I can understand what he's trying to tell me. And he says, Sir, there's a bright red-orange pulsating light, and it's hovering just above the front gate of our facility. And I've got all the guards out with their weapons pointed at this thing, and I don't know what to do. Can you give me any orders on what to do? Of course, I was shocked. I didn't have no
And at
idea.
this point, you're still 60 feet underground.
Absolutely. And I can't, much as I would have liked to, I couldn't open our blast door, is what we called it, because it would protect us from a nuclear blast upstairs. Uh, and I couldn't open that door until we were relieved by another crew. We were obliged not to open that door, obviously, for obvious reasons. We could be overtaken or overrun by some threatening force, and they would have access to those weapons. So we had to protect access to our weapons. I couldn't go up and take a look. We didn't have any video at the time up there. So I had to listen to his report. And finally, I just told him, you are responsible for securing our facility. Do what you have to maintain that security. So that's essentially what I told him. And then he said, one of my guards just got injured. I have to go, sir. He hung up the phone. Uh, the first thing I did instinctively was look over at our board, which was a panel of lights showing the status of our missiles. They were all green at this point. I then went over to wake up my commander, who had been taking a break on a little cot we had down there, and started to tell him about the phone calls. And all of a sudden, we get this large horn go off. We both know what that means. We both jump up, get to our stations, and go through our procedures. And by that time, we have all red lights up at the top of our status board. That means all the missiles are now disabled and could not be launched. So while this object was up there, uh, all those missiles went no-go. We also had two indicator lights. Each missile has a bank of lights associated with it, and two of those lights uh, uh, are indications of intrusion at the launch facilities. The launch facilities are about a mile or two away from this underground launch control center where we were. Um, they weren't just outside, they were about a mile away. And so, since we had incursion lights on two of them, I called back up to the guard to instruct him to go send teams out to two of those sites. And of course, I asked him about this or bright red orange light. And he said, it just left just as you called, sir, at high speed. Um, and so we did send guards out there to two of the sites. They again saw these objects, these lights hovering above two of those missile sites. And it frightened them. Of course, they were still frightened from what they had observed before. The guard that got injured had nothing to do with the object. It had to do with him cutting his hand, either in dealing with his rifle or possibly touching the barbed wire that we had surrounding the facility. at any rate, we had to send him back to the hospital at Malmstrom Air Force Base. So, but it wasn't serious. Um, so they reported seeing these objects again over to the launch facilities, and we ordered them. They begged not to go any further. They were supposed to go to the facilities, open the gate, look around, but they were so frightened they begged us to just return to the launch control facility. Uh, and we did. We returned them back, and they happened to lose radio contact on the way back, um, which is common around UFOs. They interfere with radio communications. Uh, so that was that, except my commander had reported our incident to the command post. And after that call, he turned to me and said the same thing happened at another flight of missiles. And I thought it was that evening when he said that. It wasn't until much later, uh, after meeting him again, after about 27 or 28 years later, um, that he clarified that that had happened uh, previously, uh, and that was the Echo flight incident, which happened 8 days prior to our own incident with the same result. In other words, all 10 of their missiles were disabled during UFO encounters. So that's 20 within 8 days. Now, the next
But it was
day,
20, what they weren't all shut down at once. It was over basically 8 days that different ones of the silos were shut down. Is that what
well,
you're saying?
let me clarify that. 8 days earlier, on March 16th, 1967, uh, Colonel Fred Mile, not Mile, Walter Fiegel was in command, like I was. He was a deputy commander. Um, he was in command when he had two teams out in at two of the launch facilities where the missiles were, or two silos of missiles, right? Uh, and they reported to him after he called them and said one of the missiles shut down, and we hadn't approved you're starting your work for the day. And he said, we did nothing. By the way, there are these UFOs hovering above us. So UFOs were reported at, again, two of the facilities at Echo Flight. Echo Flight is a separate flight from Oscar, separate location. But it was one of those flights that had control of 10 missiles, like we did. And so I later confirmed with Fiegel that yes, indeed, UFOs were reported when he lost all 10 of his missiles. So that's where the 20 comes from, right?
Mhm.
All right, so I'm going to announce a little breaking news here. So in September of 1966, there was another incident in Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. And in command, well, not in command, but one of the prime witnesses for that incident is David Schindel. He's come public now on this story and also wrote a book about it. But he replaced his crew was replacing another crew at, I believe it was November flight at Minot Air Force Base in around September of 1966. And before he even went downstairs to replace that crew, the guards upstairs told him that they saw a UFO the night before, and when he went down to replace the crew members that were on duty, he saw that all 10 of their missiles had been disabled, and again during this UFO sighting. So now that's 30 within the span of 6 months. So here's the breaking news. As I was reviewing my documents for this show, for your show, Jim, I ran across a statement given to me by Ray Fowler. And Ray Fowler, I'll explain who he is a little later. You may have heard his name. Uh, but I'm holding his statement here, part of which he gave to the uh, trying to think of the book, Christian Science Monitor in 1973. And he says during the early spring of 1966, Combat Missile Crew Commander and his fellow operator had um, lost control of 10 missiles in separate underground launch facilities. And so, again, the same kind of sequence, one by one, 10 lights blinked out in perfect sequence across the status console. Every one of those 10 assigned missiles simultaneously. And again, this was during UFO report topside. So my breaking news is we now have 40 nuclear weapons that were disabled during UFO encounters within the span of a year.
And that was all just located up sort of in the Midwest, as it were, around Montana, the
Well, it's the northern
Dakotas.
tier. Yes, the northern tier.
Yeah.
Of course, we have missiles in Wyoming.
Yeah. We have missiles all over the world, actually, you know, so
Well, I'm talking about strategic missiles.
yeah.
And there are still, to this day, operational Minuteman III now missiles in Montana, out of Great Falls, Montana. So the next day, I try to get more details from my security guard after we're relieved by another crew. I went upstairs and we talked to that security guard. He wouldn't speak to me at first. He didn't want to talk to me. And I couldn't understand why, because I was his superior. I was an officer. He was an airman. Finally, I got him to attention and demanded that he talk to me about what he saw. Because he was very reluctant. And I think it's because he had already been told not to speak to anyone about this, including us, the crew on duty. But again, he reiterated that it was a bright, very bright red-orange light that was hovering, within 50 feet of him. You could see it through the window of his office there.
And was this an orb, Bob? You was
Well,
bright
I
orange
asked,
light, or was it like a UFO, like a saucer emitting an orange light?
I asked him what was the shape of this light. He said it was kind of oblong or oval shaped. And I said, could you see inside the light, any object inside the light? And he said, I could barely see the outline of an oval shape, but it was
It
very
was
difficult.
like really luminous and hard to
Yeah, it
be
was very
exact.
luminous. It was very hard for him to get a good
Yeah.
picture of what was in there. But he did reiterate that the light seemed to pulsate. In other words, brighter than less bright. And it pulsated while it was hanging there or hovering. And then it shot off at high speed. So that's about the best he could do. They brought a helicopter out for us to take us back, which was unusual because normally we had a car to drive back, but they wanted us back on the base quickly. And when we landed, we were ordered to go to our squadron commander's office, who was an old World War II B-17 pilot. He'd been through hell in World War II, but he was as sharp as they come and very cool usually. I knew him fairly well. We had socialized together. But I walked into the office and looked him in the eye and said, "What the hell happened?" And he was white as a sheet. He shook his head and said, "I don't know." I said, "Was this some kind of an Air Force exercise?" Because I was thinking, damn, the Air Force must have, run some exercise here just to check our readiness or something. And he said, "Absolutely not." And then in the office was a man from AFOSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He comes up to both my commander and I and shoves a piece of paper in our faces. "What's this?" And he says, "It's a non-disclosure agreement. Sign right here." And I objected because we had above top secret clearance. He said, "All you have to do is, tell me not to talk about this and we won't." He said, no, he insisted that we sign. And I just had a chance to glance at this document. And one thing that stood out were the words Leavenworth Prison. In other words, I would spend a long, long time in Leavenworth Prison if I ever spoke about this uh, to anyone. And he said, "You can't talk about this to anyone, even anyone in the Air Force. Of course, not your spouse, no one else, no one." And so, in other words, he basically intimidated us. And it stuck, of course. We signed it, and then we were told to dismissed. And we were dismissed. I walked out of the office, and that was that. Except that the next morning, I received a call from the guards that were there that night, the night before. And again, they were begging me to come out and see them. They wanted me to see them and have a talk about what they saw uh, and what I thought about it. And, they just needed somebody to talk to because I think by now they too had been told not to talk about it. I guess they were taking a chance, but I I didn't want to take the chance. In fact, during the call, I thought it was being taped. We were being listened to. So I just told him I simply cannot do that. I've already signed a written agreement not to speak to you or anyone else. And they, of course, they were very disappointed. I was too, because I wanted to, discuss it with all of them. But that was that. And I did not tell my wife. I was married to another woman at the time, uh, which I divorced, who I divorced that later within a year. And then I did not talk about it to anyone at all until 1994. 1994, I was walking through a bookstore at the University of Washington in Seattle. I had just signed up to do a master's degree in education. get my teaching certificate um, because I was planning to retire from the Federal Aviation Administration. I happened to walk in this bookstore and saw a book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. In fact, this is the very book. I picked it up off the shelf, and you're not going to believe this. Hard to believe. I picked the book up and opened it up to page 301, a random page. I didn't look in the index or anything like that. I just opened it up because I wanted to read what it was about. And on that particular page, I read a paragraph. In the spring of '66, the Command Status Consoles at a Launch Control Center in Great Falls, Montana, indicated that a fault existed in each of the 10 missiles simultaneously. The missile crew checked the faults electronically and discovered that a no-go fault condition existed, which meant in effect that none of the missiles could have been launched. Above ground personnel had reported seeing UFOs at the precise moment the failures were detected. An identical incident occurred during the week of 20 March 1967. Fowler reports when radar at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, confirmed the presence of a UFO at the same time that 10 missiles became inoperative. So I read that. That was just a brief paragraph. And it was the only page in the entire 450 page book
Mhm.
that had this described. And I got pretty excited because I thought it was my incident. Um,
Yeah, you thought you had personal awareness, but that it wasn't out there in the public domain.
exactly.
Yeah.
I had never seen anything like that written down in a book. Uh, and um, so I got pretty excited. I thought the Air Force may have declassified my incident. I thought this was my incident because of the description. And so I went home and maybe a little carelessly told my wife, this is what I experienced, and showed her the paragraph. And I hadn't said anything to her in all the time we had been married. We had been married about 25 years by then. And
Extraordinary.
yeah, it was extraordinary. And I told her I was taking a risk in even telling her because I had been ordered not to. But then a friend of hers who happened to be there at the same time knew about MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and she suggested I contact them and get an investigator to find out more about what's written in this book. And so I did. I contacted a man by the name of James Klotz, who was an investigator for MUFON in the Seattle area. Klotz, and I told him what I had recalled of my incident, and Klotz suggested that we write to the Air Force under the Freedom of Information Act and ask for any documentation on this incident. But we both agreed not to say anything about UFOs in the letter to the Air Force. And so we did. We sent a letter. The Air Force wrote back and said, this incident is classified. However, since so much time has passed, we're going to declassify it and we'll send you some documents on this particular incident. And they did.
Hmm.
So that's how I was able to come forward. When we got those documents, many of whom are in my book, faded giant. I've got a copy of it here somewhere. Oh yeah, faded giant. Which we wrote together, James and I, in 2005, and they declassified what's called the Echo Flight incident. Now, even after seeing that, uh, so so much time had gone by that my recollection was not clear as to exactly where I was at the time of the incident. Anybody who's ever had to deal with classified information, I think, reacts the same way. Unless they're using that information in their day-to-day work, they try to forget it because we can't be revealing classified information at let's say a social setting when we've had too much to drink or something like that. We don't want to reveal anything like classified. So uh, your mind works in a way that it deliberately tries to subdue those memories. And so that's what had happened. But I still thought I was at Echo Flight, even though I knew it was in the 490th Squadron of the wing. And the 490th only covered the Kilo Lima Mike November Oscar flights. It didn't have the Echo flight in it. But we did from time to time substitute at other squadrons when they didn't have enough personnel to man the launch control facilities. So I kind of justified the idea that I was at Echo Flight when we first got this information. And that's what I was telling the public when I went public.
Well, Bob,
I,
let me just
yeah,
interrupt here because I'd like to broaden the conversation out now, with your permission, because I think there's some planetary issues that are at stake. But thank you for telling your story and the detail that you have. I'd like to begin by saying or inquiring about sort of once you found out, I'm familiar, I'm sure, with Robert Hastings and his book on UFOs and the nukes, and other works that have come out. Uh, to your knowledge, have you made a study at all of how many UFO nuclear weapon facility incidences there have been? You-
I
Not
have,
only in the United States, but in Russia and China and India, there's a number of countries, obviously, that have had nuclear weapons.
right, and the Netherlands, uh, yes, well, from time to time, I would be contacted by other people, witnesses,
Yeah,
uh, in different locations. And so, and we have gotten together and given presentations to the public at the National Press Club. In my book, I've written 3 books. One of those books has a listing of about 13 incidents, but in all the books, I talk about other incidents, including the one in Russia in 1982. Uh,
that's when the UFOs actually turned the nukes on.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Actually started a Russian intercontinental ballistic missile on its launch sequence and shut it down just before launch and scared the hell out of the crew, of course, the Russian crew. Uh, but yeah, there have been incidents, like I said, in Italy and in the Netherlands, which had over 12 witnesses who have come forward. There's a new documentary out on that. That was the Schlüsselburg UFO incident. Schlüsselburg is a city in the Netherlands, but there's also is or was an air base, a Dutch air base, but part of it was being used by an American contingent at the time. This was trying to think, 93, I think, something like that. Or maybe it was, I can't remember the date right now, but it's in my book, my latest book, the discussion of that one. But I have identified at least 13, but there have been many, many more worldwide and in the US incidents where either UFOs have come over nuclear weapons bases and nuclear power plants, and we can discuss why there. Uh, but nuclear weapons bases and either shut missiles down or disrupted operations or communications in some way or another, or just simply flown over and shown a beam of light on the weapons and then flew off.
Well, and you
So
also have the orbs that have the drones, so-called, beginning in October, November of 2024, continuing to the present day in Europe now, where U.S. as well as European military facilities, even airports, have been shut down. And again, it's coterminous with the nuclear weapons threat and the escalations and so forth and so on. So this is something that's actually both historic, as you've recorded it, but also completely contemporary.
absolutely. Of course, we came the closest to nuclear war in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I received a letter from a witness who was at Ramey Air Force Base where B-52s were lined up, were ready to launch in case of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he saw a UFO over the flight line on that particular time period. So certainly they are aware of the possibility that we could have a nuclear war. It's a very real possibility. We now have 9 nuclear nations and prospects of more in the future. Uh,
Yes.
as you know, our President Trump, just announced a deal with uh, Saudi Arabia, providing them with uh, material help and knowledge for their development of nuclear power plants in Saudi Arabia. The same thing happened with India uh, when they were asking for our help in the development of nuclear power plants.
Totally.
Uh, and it wasn't long after that that they had tested and have in their possession now nuclear weapons.
Let
So,
me, let me ask you this, as we're beginning to draw to a close here. How do you interpret all this data? Would you say that the UFOs are both aware of and concerned with the nuclear weapons? Do you think this is random? How do you interpret all your own experience and the data that you've gathered? What do you think is actually happening?
yeah, there have been so many of these incidents, like I described, uh,
Yeah, scores and scores.
that I have to believe, since this was not an attack, I didn't see this on reflection as an attack on our weapons, our nuclear weapons, because there was no damage done. No damage done to the missiles, missile systems, components, or the weapons themselves. They simply wanted to send a message, I think, because of the propensity and the quantity of these incidents. It was a mess. These are all a message to us, and a message that I think says, get rid of these nuclear weapons. Let's abolish, we want to see you, humans, abolish all nuclear weapons so you will not eventually destroy this beautiful planet with so much life, diverse life, and probably affect them in some way. Because again, there's got to be some connection between us and them. They have been visiting this planet for a long time, centuries. Uh, and I think they are interested in our evolution. I think they want to see us succeed as a life form and join them as uh, members of the galactic community uh, in going forward and evolving. And we are obviously a warlike people. Uh, we are continually at war. And as the number of these nuclear weapons proliferate in the world, the risk and the chances of somebody using those weapons in warfare increases over time. And that's why this concept of deterrence, that's how we justify having these weapons as a deterrence, is not really working, and it won't work in the long term. I don't want to take the time here, but I've made the argument in my books many times that nuclear deterrence uh, only helps to proliferate uh, nuclear
Exactly.
weapons.
Exactly. 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 And the fact of the matter is that the whole philosophy of fighting fire with fire just creates more fire, and we're about ready to burn the whole house down if we don't stop. And just in the few minutes we've got left, I just want to note that you have offered to testify in Congress, along with other individuals from the military who've had direct experience as you have. You interviewed Congressman Burleson a few months ago, and that was sent out on the airways. Many people saw that. So I want to just note that you're continuing to be actively engaged in these matters, including at the congressional level. And we're working with a number of colleagues here in Washington, as you know, Steve Bassett and others, to get Bob into a congressional hearing so that this whole aspect of the UFO phenomenon, which to my mind is in many ways the reason why they're here in such numbers, and the concern that they've expressed, we need to internalize so that we can take the process toward the dismantling of the nuclear weapons rather than continued escalation of more weapons and uh, diminishing triggering mechanisms.
Right.
Highly dangerous situation.
Absolutely. I think we all heard President again say that we're on a modernization program of our nuclear arsenal. One of those so-called modernizations is the development or further development of so-called tactical nuclear weapons. Uh, they can be have more utility. They weigh less. They can be used in the field or stockpiled in the field during a regional war, such as we're having in Ukraine, or a regional war like what is happening between India and Pakistan, who are both nuclear powers, by the way,
Or Israel and Iran.
or Israel and Iran,
Yeah,
yes.
it's a
Now,
very
these
dangerous situation.
so-called tactical nuclear weapons have the same um, rating as far as explosive power as the ones we used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, about 15 to 20 kilotons. But they have been miniaturized. They can be used on cannon.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, this is part and parcel of this idea of nuclear deterrence, modernizing and so-called improving our nuclear capability to strengthen our perceived deterrence. But the Russians are doing the same. They're developing tactical nuclear weapons. And again, this just simply creates a risk that they could be used by military commanders in a regional war. And if they are, certainly there could be escalation to more powerful nuclear weapons, strategic ones,
Yeah.
uh, and we could find ourselves in an outright nuclear holocaust, um, which would imply the complete destruction of humanity and a lot of life forms on this planet.
Thank you, Bob. This has been wonderful to hear about your life story and the prospect that we all face of a nuclear exchange if we don't take the advice of the ETs very, very seriously. And of course, that's one reason why at the State of the World Forum, we're working to bring these intelligences together, because if we could engage in an intelligible communication with these non-human intelligences, we would probably learn a lot about the nature of their concern and the pathway we could take to eliminate these threats to existence of life on our planet. So thank you for all you do. Bob is going to join the after chat. Everyone, you can join the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box that Stan has put in the chat. You received the link in your Zoom reminders today that you received by email. So that'll bring our session to a close. Bob, thank you so much. And please remember, everyone, go to stateoftheworld.forum so you can register for the State of the World Forum, which will be between December 14th and December 17th as a live global interactive broadcast. And Bob Salas is going to be part of that discussion. Thank you, Bob. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jim.
Bye for now. See you in the
Bye.
after chat.
Yes.